Good evening, everyone, and it's good to see David Gower once again. Here we are with a mid-series review. Hello, David.
And a very good evening to you, Vivek.
Thank you, David. And we are now in the middle of this very fascinating series between India and England. And as we know, it's topsy-turvy because England won the first and India won the second, both by tons of runs, piles of runs. And it's as if they were two different teams playing. And on that note, we must start with the fact that England, especially, half the team seems to be changing after every test match. And I was listening to perhaps Michael Vaughan, who was saying that when Joe Root looks around in Ahmedabad, he's going to find half his team is somebody else. So, what do you think about this?
Well, I know we talked about it after the first test match as well, because of course they knew after that first test match the likes of Joss Buttler was going to go home and have a break from these interminable bubbles. I mean, the only controversy seems to have been just the way things are phrased. And when Moeen Ali said, quote, or was quoted as suggesting he wanted to go home, it took a couple of days before England management then said, but that was always the plan anyway. And they only sort of tried to rethink it because he'd had a reasonably good game in that second test match. But I mean, these are very, very complicated times. I'll accept that. But I'd also stick to my guns in as much as, a test series against India. This is what we said after the first test match. A test series against India is a huge event. India, we know, as the powerhouse of world cricket with a fantastic team. You go to India, you want to win that series, and if you do so, for instance, if Joe Root somehow in these next couple of games in Ahmedabad comes out on top, well, that'd be an enormous achievement for Joe and his team. And to have team changes foisted upon you by this rotation policy, to be in effect slightly hamstrung, because if someone, I mean, just to use Moen as an example, he hadn't played a test match for donkeys. He's had COVID himself a few weeks ago now. He's got into the team. He's started to get some rhythm. Okay, the runs he got at the end of the game were just fun runs at the end of a dead game. But you get a few wickets. Therefore, under normal circumstances, you'd be saying as an individual, right, I'm looking forward to the next game because I can get better and better and re-establish myself in the test team. But because of all this COVID stuff, because of the bubbles, because of the way the one-day game is getting as much or apparently more attention now, it seems, from England management, however much they say they are focused equally on test matches, then you're right. Joe Root is basically going to have to look at the team sheet in front of him, look around the dressing room, see if he can match the figures and the faces to the names, and start again, which is not ideal. But I mean, there will be, given that we've got a day-night test match coming up and the things that brings, there, of course, will be or would have been tweaks to that team anyway, I suggest.
You're absolutely right, David. I agree. These are uncertain times, difficult times, and different times. But priorities have to be right, and perhaps the Ashes is still top priority for England, and maybe India should be number two priority at least. But we won't go deeper into that. We'll just talk about the team for the next test. Likely, we look at Zach Crawley perhaps coming back after his injury. We also perhaps may have Johnny Bairstow playing. We also may have a three-man pace attack this time, plus Ben Stokes. So we may have Anderson, Archer, Broad, which means Anderson and Archer make their way back to the team. And two spinners, so probably Dom West coming back. So it's five new players from the one that lost, the team that lost Chennai. Really, are these the changes that you also feel are likely?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, one of the contests is between Crawley and Bairstow. Bairstow played well in Sri Lanka. And again, we said the same thing about that. When he, having got his runs in Sri Lanka and looked pretty settled at the crease against spin there, it was one of those tricky things to say, yes, you can go home, have a couple of weeks off and then see what happens next. So, same point. I mean, I'm a great believer that once you've got some form going, you want to try and keep it going in the middle in competitive cricket, in test matches. So you got him up against Crawley. I suspect, I'm not quite sure. I don't have an inside track nowadays, sadly, to the England dressing room. So normally speaking, Crawley would win that battle, given the test team's composition over the last 12 months. Again, going back to the double hundred he made against Pakistan in the English summer, that's the sort of thing that you want to see Zach Crawley building on. And I think personally he has immense promise. I think he's got a very good temperament, a lot of skill, of course. Anyway, you take that almost for granted, but he's got a good style, good technique, and I'd quite like to see him play. I mean, I'm also a Bairstow fan as well, actually. So there's a bit of a toss of a coin there, maybe. But for the bowlers, Anderson, of course, waltzes back in. If there's anything in the atmosphere in Ahmedabad at dusk, then someone like Jimmy Anderson is the man best qualified to take advantage of it. And Archer again, if he's fully recovered from that elbow injury, then he's pretty much a shoo-in. So yes, the options are there, and I mean those options would have happened anyway. I think, given the fact they're playing this day-night Test match, and it's just in a way, I suspect it's just the number 3 slot that they'll want to sort of think about, just to see whether they're going with current form, as it were, if you can call it that, for Johnny Bairstow, or the future with Zach Crawley.
You're absolutely right, David. I'm a Johnny Bairstow fan as well. I wish he plays more for England. But let's talk about 4 batsmen from the Chennai Test. How did they perform? The 2 openers. So Sibley, in the first Test at Chennai, played pretty well. He played very long and he made 80-odd runs. This time, obviously difficult turning ball. Ashwin bowling from over 1 almost. And Rory Burns as well. In the second innings, he looked settled. But then he got a vicious turner, which he kind of nicked. And then you have Joe Root, who, after a mountain of runs, finally got out early-ish, you could say. And that too, again, maybe you can put it down to the pitch and not to form, of course. Ben Stokes as well made an 80-odd in the first Test, but here it was tough going. So what do you think of them?
Well, I mean, let's just attack the obvious part of this topic first of all. The pitch for the second Test match was very different to the pitch for the first Test match. First Test pitch was, about as long as you like for 2-3 days, and turn came into the game gradually and steadily, as you'd normally expect. Whereas for the second pitch, different soil, different surface. The second pitch, you saw the ball on that first morning turning. You saw what else? I mean, you saw puffs of dust coming out of the pitch. So it was already a very different place to be on that second Test pitch. Now, at the end of it all, you look at all those figures from that second Test, and India managed to score a lot of runs. Rohit Sharma played beautifully. Ashwin with that 100 of his own on home turf, home dust. He played. He played the situation. Played the situation really well, and I always find it fascinating because there was a very good article written in the Times of London this morning as we speak, and it was under the byline Michael Atherton, who I respect immensely, quoted 1 or 2 other sources who've looked into the way that people talk about pitches, and I don't know if I've still got it somewhere to hand, to be honest. Just checking to see if I could find a note, because I made up something else earlier. But the point is this: if you have a turning pitch that turns early, it is criticised heavily and rapidly. If you have a seaming pitch, like some of the pitches we played on in England the last few years, then it's described as challenging. And yet the figures show you that on something like out of the last 21 Test matches since 2014, where England had been bowled out twice in England, and out of those 21 times, 13 times they've been bowled out in fewer overs than they were in Chennai, and 17 times for fewer runs. So, and that's under seaming conditions. So, that pitch for the second Test match, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a great pitch by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think many people would. If it had been like the first one and sort of gradually turn more as the game went on, that's kind of what you expect. And just looking at the puffs of dust from the slow motion replays, I mean, that was happening from day one, which I don't think really should be right. But look at Rohit, look at Ashwin, look at Virat in second innings, Curl in second innings. Obviously, if you get in and play really well, I mean, there is a real challenge there. So that spin like that is challenging, as seam is under green seaming conditions in the UK. So it's a challenge which some people can meet. But at the same time, if you're looking for that absolute balance, that perfect balance between bat and ball, I would happily say, or unhappily say, depends which way you look at it, that the turning ball had too much in its favour for too much of that second Test match. And you look at some of the way some of those balls pitch. Some of them hit, that little firm bit, and there's no puff of dust. Most of them hit a puff of dust, or the surface was exploding. And when you look at, for instance, you mentioned Joe Root. When you look at Joe, I mean, he was still trying to do the same things he was doing in Sri Lanka, first of all, and in Chennai in the first Test match. And yet the degree of risk was upped simply because of the turn and the bounce being less predictable. So even if you've got a ball turning, if you can have some sort of element of prediction in the way it's going to bounce and turn, you can still play the shots that Joe is playing. If that element of prediction goes out the window, well, you just know you're taking a risk, and you have to try and calculate that risk. And every time you play a shot, your sort of heart is in your mouth as to whether or not it's going to come off. So it's interesting. It's interesting to watch. I mean, I have to say, from the moment that India won the toss at the start of that second Test match, I was thinking India will win this game. I couldn't predict how it would all pan out exactly, and I couldn't predict the margin of victory, which was immense. But I felt that, just looking at the way the game started, there was probably only going to be one winner at the end of it.
Yeah, it looks like that, David. But I want to talk about these three batsmen you mentioned, and they did pretty well. Rohit Sharma 161 on that pitch, and then Ashwin hitting a century after 5 years for India. Perhaps in my view, and I noticed him in Sydney playing Nathan Lyon as well so well, he's probably the best player of spin in the team, as far as I can see. Even though Virat Kohli as well played beautifully in the second innings. What do you think of these three innings on that pitch?
Right. Well, Rohit, as we know, is a very, very positive player. So he has the mindset that he's going to make life hard for bowlers if he possibly can. So whether that's the seamers dropping short or over, he plays seam, plays the quicker bowlers well. I mean, he pulls and hooks well. There wasn't a lot of pace in that pitch, so that helps that particular shot. And let's face it, on day one, although there were still puffs of dust, that was still the best day to be batting, I would say, out of the 5 in that second Test match. So he took advantage, played beautifully. I have to say, he plays absolutely, and he is a naturally positive stroke-making batsman. So he's going to take the attack to seamers. He's going to take the attack to spinners. Every now and again, he's going to ride his luck. I mean, there were comments, for instance, in Australia a couple of times when he got out playing shots that those watching didn't like. And I know the feeling. You have to defend yourself as the batsman and say, look, I play the odds. Sometimes the odds are against me. Sometimes the odds are, I get it wrong. But when he gets his 160s, of course, everyone loves him, and quite rightly so. So and you look at his record. His record is outstanding. His record is brilliant. So, make the most of it. Enjoy it while it lasts. Virat, as we know, yes, is the world's top player, give or take. So, yes, he can play. When he plays, that second innings was a masterclass of its own. And, I mean, I don't think he put a foot wrong in the second innings. He got a beauty against him in the first innings. He didn't play it particularly well, but it was still a very fine ball. Maybe he wasn't expecting Moeen to pitch it in exactly the right spot and get turn at that precise moment. But these things happen to the best of us. I mean, the thing I'm going to say about Ashwin is this: he's proved himself over the years to be a very capable lower order batsman, and he's got better and better. You don't expect him to be making hundreds every third game or something, but he's up there with the most productive all-rounders in the history of the game. As we saw the stats, the men who've made hundreds in a game and taken 5 wickets in the innings, there are very few who've done that. My long-time friend and colleague Ian Botham did it a few times. Fine, he was a genuine all-rounder and a better batsman than Ashwin. Yeah. But obviously very different sorts of bowlers. Now, the thing about Ashwin's batting down the order is this: if you come in down the order, there is a different mindset, I think, compared to batting in the top 4 or 5. Because if you're in that top 4 or 5, the expectation is that you somehow, with your skill and temperament and all the rest of it, cope with conditions, but you build that innings. You set your stall out. You have to back yourself in the top 5 to get in, to get set, to assess conditions. And when you get it right, you stay there a long time and make big runs. Whereas when you come in lower down the order, you have a sort of greater freedom to take risks. So, for instance, for Ashwin, although I'm not going to take anything away from the quality of the innings, because he hit some brilliant shots, especially later on in the innings, smashing it over deep in wicket for 6. But you have a little sort of more freedom in your mind to take those risks, because you know at that stage that if they come off in your favor, the whole team is going fantastic, great, well done, well played. Whereas if you take a risk and it doesn't come off, then actually it's less responsibility on your shoulders at that stage than if you're in the top 4 or 5. So there is that slightly different mindset to batting. But once he got in, I mean, you're absolutely right about him. When he gets in, he's hard to dislodge by the quicker bowlers on a flat pitch, on not a very quick pitch, and he knows what he's doing against spinners. It's that sort of spinner's mindset, I guess, that understands what's coming from the other end. So, and he hits the ball very cleanly. I mean, some of those shots he hit were just beautifully struck, very cleanly struck, and would have been proudly struck by a man of greater batting pedigree, which of course sounds slightly rude, but that's why he's such a useful player down the order. That's why when he comes in as a captain of the opposition side, you're thinking not, okay, we're nearly through India now. You're thinking, hang on a second, this bloke can bat. Yeah. And he proved it yet again. So it was obviously the innings that in the end took the game completely out of reach of England, although in realistic terms, by that stage, not many people were betting on England anyway.
Absolutely. Well analyzed, David. I agree with you as ever. The thing that we want to talk about now is the bowlers. Now, we had 2 pacers on each side, so-called pacers. I mean, they were worthless on this pitch, you could say. They had no fire or bite in them. 2 overs each to Broad and Stone, I think, in the second innings. Stone did pick up some wickets in the first innings, and he bowled pretty quick and well. In India, I mean, for the Indians, you had Ishant and Siraj, and both of them were just, there for making up the numbers. It's about the spinners mainly. So the 2 spinners that England used, Moeen and Leach, and the 3 spinners that India had, Ashwin, Aksar, and Kuldeep. What do you make of them?
Right, those spinners, yes. Well, Leach is gaining experience all the time. I thought he bowled all right. I thought he bowled pretty well. Moeen took time to get a bit of rhythm, which of course you expect. I mean, again, this whole thing about modern international cricket, with or without COVID, with or without bubbles, is that you do not get hours, miles under the belt, as it were. You don't get time in the middle purveying your art, because tours don't allow it. So in the middle of a winter like this for the English team, away from home with only test matches to play, where can Moeen practice? He has to practice in the middle in a test match against India. So it took him a while to get his rhythm. And obviously now he's taken the option, or they between them have accepted the option of him taking a break before the white ball cricket starts, which brings back Dom Bess, who Dom's a lovely character, and he's battled away for the last few years since his debut. When he made his debut, he was a very, very ordinary spinner and very lucky to be in the England team, but he got runs. The irony of getting runs as night watchman. Almost got himself 100 in his first test match, but he has grown in stature as a bowler. But then in that first test match in Chennai, there were too many loose balls, and this is an unforgiving business at the highest level. Bowling spin in India against players of very good players of spin, you don't have that luxury. So he's had a week to think about it. I'm sure he's been talked to. I'm sure they'll have built him up again psychologically, because he's going to be back in the fray straight away. And I think he's promising. I don't think he's Graham Swan. I mean, the last great off spinner we had was Graham Swan, and even Graham, towards the end of his career, last couple of years of his career, lost his powers a bit. And if you lose your powers, you become ordinary. So Dom Bess is on the way up. Only time will tell whether in, say, 10 years' time he's managed to become a very fine bowler. But at the moment, he's a good bowler learning his trade. For India, I thought Axar was very good. I thought, obviously there's the one thing that's, the ball is turning. So actually it simplifies the game in many ways. All you have to do basically is hit the length and wait to see what happens. Because if you've got your fingers around the ball, at some stage on that pitch, it's going to grip and turn. And it's just a question then as to whether it gets the edge, misses it by a millimetre or 10, when you get the wickets. So I thought he bowled well. I thought he had good control. Pace was good. He judged the pace of his bowling well, because sometimes in those pitches you need to sort of push it forward just that little bit quicker. Ashwin is Ashwin. We don't need to discuss Ashwin. We know he knows what he's doing. we know that he knows what he's doing too. So he will be steady wherever. And Kuldeep, of course, if I can say Kuldeep is Kuldeep, we know that with the wrist spinner, there's variety, yes, and occasionally that will bring you something special. Again, he's not in the sort of the world's list of great wrist spinners, but he's a very good one. If you see the difference, and he'll bowl you loose balls. And there's another point I was going to make about bowling spin on that pitch. Although everyone acknowledges it turned a lot, so he had turn and bounce pretty much throughout the game. I've played with spinners who prefer less of that, because when it's turning sort of 30 degrees,
so much, yeah,
you're going to miss the bat every time. Batsmen, it's just a complete lottery whether you miss by 6 inches or a foot, or whether it's just full enough so you might just get the edge. So when it's turning 15 degrees, say, for the sake of argument, you bring the outside edge more into play more often. And I know spinners, like a very good spinner I played with back in my era, a fellow called John Embury, who much preferred it when it was turning just a little bit. And he had the right he had all the control you'd want of a spinner, and he kept firing away on the right lines. And just that little bit of something was what he wanted to take his wickets. And he almost found it harder when the ball was turning extravagantly. So there is that point to mention. But when you look at them, Ashwin, reliable as ever, very talented, very skillful, has all the subtle variations that make him just that bit different. Axar Patel will be learning by the game. And, what more can you do for your confidence than by picking up a 5-wicket haul in your first test match? So that gets you off to a good start. That gives you, as it were, money in the bank. Because, for instance, if Ahmedabad is a flatter pitch, doesn't turn as much, and you have to work harder for your wickets, or maybe if it even starts to favour the seamers more than the spinners for a while, then, of course, it's a different sort of game when you start again. And Axar Patel will have to learn or will have to adapt the way he bowls to those conditions. But again, from here, I can't really see the pitch, to be honest.
I can understand that. Even we don't know what it's going to be like, but I think it's going to be the pink ball is going to seam and swing for a while. I think the spin will come into play maybe on the second or third day still. But I want to also quickly ask you about the two keepers. They've been in the limelight, and Adam Gilchrist praised both Ben Foakes and Rishabh Pant as well for one stumping. So do you think Foakes is the best keeper that England have out of all these three? Bairstow, Butler, Foakes, and Pant and Saha we have?
Yes, starting with Foakes, I think Ben is the best keeper in England. There was a headline somewhere I saw on the web during that second test match, basically either stating or asking the question, is he the best keeper in the world? He is a brilliantly talented gloveman. And I mean, okay, Chennai tests even the best. I mean, there were mistakes as well as some brilliant moments. But I think you look at the way, actually, both keepers I thought kept well, to be honest, because when you look at the way the ball is turning and bouncing, especially, they were standing up. I mean, folks were standing up to broad as well. It's sort of very old-fashioned in many ways. That brings risk into it. But both men actually did really well. Foakes, I expect him to do that because he is both very, very good at what he does with the gloves and, of course, quite handy with the bat. And he seems to have the temperament. But, I mean, for instance, when he first played Test cricket a couple of years ago in Sri Lanka, he just got on with it, kept beautifully, got 100, just as if he'd been playing for a decade. Then he's tapped on the shoulder and told, sorry, but the balance the side means we need someone else to keep wicket. And he goes off and, it comes back in and does well again. So I think he's got a very good temperament. And, all he can say to himself is, well, whatever opportunities there are, just do your best to take them. And for instance, he knows he's going to be, unless something very strange happens, he's keeping for these next two test matches. And, it's up to him just to increase his reputation game by game as best he can. I thought Rishabh Pant actually did a very good job as well, because he's had more obvious, he's a man learning how to keep. Yeah. And again, a little bit like everyone nowadays coming into internationals, you tend to be, you're learning on the job. You don't have years and years necessarily of domestic first-class cricket to hone your skills anymore. You become a sort of traveling thespian international cricketer. So what he's done, I think, in the last few weeks even, is improved dramatically, because all those critics of his about the way he keeps wicket. I think would have been very impressed with the way he dealt with some very testing stuff behind the stumps on that very interesting pitch in Chennai in the second test.
Yeah, I think his batting is also translating into his wicket-keeping confidence, perhaps. But let's talk about the confidence and the psychology a little bit. I mean, England going in are now 1-all, and they need to probably win both test matches to qualify for the championship final. India probably needs to win one and not lose the other, or win both. That's how it seems to me. So the psychology, now this is the pink ball test, and England probably feel that they should try and win this one, because the next one again would be a day match in a way and could be on a flatter pitch. And if India lose this one, then again we're going to get a turning wicket on the fourth one. So what do you think the psychology is, and what are we planning for the rest of the series?
Well, I mean, the psychology is a fascinating topic, isn't it? Because I mean, some people deal with it instinctively. They have the sort of natural ability that somewhere in here is the right bits of machinery that just get you going again at the start of each and every game. If you're, for instance, Joe Root or Silverwood as the coach, or anyone, for instance, speaking the team meeting for England before this next Test match, there'll be some stirring stuff. There'll be mention of the day-night conditions. There'll be the team changes. There'll be someone saying, just remember what we did in Chennai in the first Test match. And all the same. The trouble is, to be fair, I mean, this always amuses me. When I was captain of England all those many, many years ago, and I remember when I was first playing for England, we had Mike Brearley as captain, who was a very astute captain, one of the best you'll ever come across. But every team meeting you have before a Test match boils down to this. We will bat, make 600. We'll bowl the opposition out twice for 150. We win by an innings and 300. End of team meeting. And of course, reality is incredibly different because, first of all, it depends on the pitch, maybe on the toss, maybe who's fit, on your team selection. All these many, many factors go into what happens over the possible 5 days of a Test match. So the psychology at the start of it is, well, look, their most recent winning template was Chennai Test match number 1 of this series. They've got 2 winning Test matches in Sri Lanka before that, and they go back to that. You reset back to those games where things have gone well, and you say, right, what do we learn from those? What do we remember from those? And what do we learn from the mistakes we might have made in the second Test in Chennai? And then, of course, you have to play the game according to conditions on the pitch. And as you suggest, Ahmedabad might be, for this first of the 2 games in Ahmedabad, might be a pretty good pitch for 2-3 days, whatever it might be. I don't know. And if that's the case, then batting first, as England did in Chennai in the first Test, and putting those runs on the board, whoever gets them, whether it's Joe Root or someone else, if you're putting 400 plus on the board in the first innings, you're very much in the game. And so that's what they will want to say to themselves. And yes, of course, you cannot control the toss. But if you are, even if you have to bat second, if you put runs on the board in the first innings, you're still in the game.
Yes, David, we are running out of time. I want a quick question on the IPL auctions. Moin Ali went for what we call in India 7 crores of rupees, which I haven't converted for you. But the point is that that innings probably helped him, and that bowling also helped him. So any impact of the IPL on the series, or how do you see it? It's pretty much close after the Dubai IPL and not much time. And I, for one, am loving the Test series and not really looking forward to the IPL. But your views?
I'm with you on that one. I think if I'm absolutely honest, I hadn't even thought about IPL at this stage because, the Test series to me is, I suppose, like all the purists or like many purists, the Test series comes first in my mind. And everything we've talked about in this chat, pertains to the most important thing. What is interesting is that whatever happens in this IPL draft, there is talk in the UK, talk in England about how many English players will be involved, whether they'll be involved throughout, whether, for instance, they'll be allowed to stay at IPL rather than playing Test matches against New Zealand because of the timescale on this next IPL. And we have Test matches, 2 tests against New Zealand relatively early in the English summer. And that's what I find slightly disappointing, if I can put it mildly, because I have nothing against. I mean, first of all, I think it's very good that English players have got involved in IPL. In the early days, they were basically prevented from joining IPL by the English Cricket Board. They weren't necessarily sought after by IPL anyway, and there was that sort of big gap at the start, as it were. But now that the likes of Stokes and Bairstow and Hales and various others and Butler, it's quite a long list now of English players who've been very good in IPL. So I think it's good for them to be part of it. Yes. And I think, I mean, for instance, the best example I can give you is Butler a couple of years ago had a fantastic IPL, came back to the UK full of confidence, was a surprise pick for the English Test team, and yet the confidence he had from that IPL performance served him well in the cricket he played that summer, whatever the form of the game. So there is that sort of element to it. So I think it is a good thing that English players are involved in IPL. But at the same time, I would prefer if, even if, for instance, that series against New Zealand doesn't impact on the World Test Championship, which it won't, I would still prefer that people value Test cricket enough to say, I want to be part of that Test team. I'm going to say to my IPL franchise, look, I'm sorry, I cannot be with you beyond the end of May, whatever it is, so I can play Test matches for England. Because I think still that players, whatever they think about their bank balances and the element of a financial career in a sport like this, I still think players have pride in themselves, that when they look back on their records, whenever that day comes where they throw the bat in the dustbin and give the pads away and the rest of it, they'll look back with their Test records as the most important part of it. And yes, fine, if you can afford a big 60-inch television because you just made $1 million on IPL, great. But actually, if you go to your deathbed thinking, really wished I'd played those other 10 Test matches and got another 1,000 runs or another 100 wickets, whatever it might be, or as you look back on that career, I think there's a possibility some will rue it.
I love that, David. Fascinating coming from you, a legend on Test cricket, and the way you batted in your career is still memorable. I mean, many of my friends, we talk about it. Thank you so much for joining us on these conversations, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you after the third Test again, and then finally after the fourth one. We have some fascinating Test cricket coming up. All the best for your commentary stint in Pakistan for the PSL, and look forward to seeing you soon again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. It's been a while since I've had a bit of a break. Put it that way. In acting terms, I've been resting from commentary boxes for over a year now, so that'll be fun and a very new perspective for me. And of course, we all know how enthusiastic cricket is. How enthusiastic cricket is followed all the way across Asia. So India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. So a couple of weeks in Pakistan will be fascinating and good fun. And I will also be, of course, keeping a close eye on what India and England are doing in Ahmedabad.
Yes, and perhaps there's a rotation policy for commentators as well. We'll talk about it later. Thank you very much.
I don't want rotating. I just want a job.
Thank you, David. Lovely.
My pleasure.